Welcome! Today we return to a political controversy that has never been fully resolved and now carries renewed urgency. It involves the Democratic Alliance, former Western Cape Premier Helen Zille, and Paul Scheepers, a man now convicted in a landmark National Prosecuting Authority case. This is a story about governance, accountability, and questions that remain unanswered more than a decade later. Background. Some political controversies fade with time, others persist because they are rooted in documents, contracts, and institutional decisions. The Scheepers matter falls into the second category. In 2010, under a DA-led Western Cape government, a private company associated with Paul Scheepers was contracted to provide what was described as debugging services within the provincial executive environment. The reported cost was just over 100,000 rand, but the controversy was never about the amount. It was about what kind of service was provided, who provided it, and how it was procured. Why the contract raised concerns. The service involved executive communications, one of the most sensitive areas of any government. This was not a routine procurement. It involved access to devices and systems used by senior political leaders. The procurement was reportedly done through a limited or deviation process. That immediately raised governance questions. Why was there no open tender? Who approved the deviation? What legal and security assessments were conducted? And what safeguards were in place to prevent misuse? At the time, the DA maintained that the work was just debugging and the matter was treated as closed. The 2015 warnings. In 2015, these issues were publicly raised by Fiers Jacobs, then ANC Western Cape Provincial Secretary. Jacobs argued that the matter was not about party politics, but constitutional responsibility. He questioned why a private entity linked to a serving crime intelligence officer was used. He questioned the absence of a competitive tender. And he questioned why scrutiny was met with dismissal rather than transparency. No independent inquiry was convened. No full procurement file was released. The story faded, but the questions remained. The 2026 turning point. Fast forward to 2026. After an 11-year legal process, Paul Scheepers has now been convicted on multiple charges. According to the National Prosecuting Authority, the case is a landmark prosecution. The convictions include fraud, money laundering, and contraventions related to private security regulation and surveillance-related compliance. Sentencing is expected in April 2026. While the court did not rule on the legality of the 2010 Western Cape contract itself, the convictions have fundamentally changed the context. They confirm that the individual at the center of the controversy operated in a legally and ethically high-risk space. Why this matters now? This is no longer a historical debate about language. It is now a live governance credibility issue. The question is not whether the risk was theoretical. The risk has been demonstrated. In democratic governance, accountability does not wait for a criminal conviction linked directly to a specific contract. It requires transparency, especially when sensitive services are outsourced into executive environments. Unanswered questions. Despite the passage of time, key questions remain unanswered. Who approved the 2010 contract and on what legal basis? Why was limited procurement used for a high-risk service? What vetting and compliance checks were conducted? What safeguards were in place to prevent unlawful interception or data misuse? And where is the full procurement and governance record? To date, those documents have not been made public. The broader governance issue. Critics argue this episode reflects a broader governing approach, one that resists scrutiny when uncomfortable questions are raised. In recent years, Cape Town and the Western Cape have faced repeated controversies involving procurement, investigative units, and calls for independent oversight. Supporters of the DA often point to clean audits. But governance experts caution that clean audits alone do not prove ethical procurement, transparency, or institutional restraint. Financial compliance is not the same as accountability. Helen Zille and accountability. Helen Zille has since positioned herself as a national figure advocating for clean governance and the rule of law. However, critics argue unresolved questions from her tenure weaken that claim. They say accountability cannot be selective and trust cannot be demanded while records remain unpublished. The issue they argue is not political rhetoric. It is documentation. Closing. This story is not about party rivalry. It is about whether a government treated sensitive power with the seriousness it demands. The contract existed, the service was sensitive, the procurement was limited, and the central figure has now been convicted in a landmark case. That combination demands transparency. Because democratic legitimacy is not something leaders declare. It is something they prove.